Good evening and welcome to Gunner Shot. Welcome to this Casa and Gunner Shot webinar on India-China breakthrough. The India-China breakthrough is a momentous occasion, and I have with me a very eminent panel to discuss the, the complete complexity of this whole story. Let me first welcome everyone. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar once again. General Gautham Murthy, sir, Ambassador Trigunayat, and General Bhatia. Great to see you here. Professor Kondapalli, I think, is stuck somewhere. He'll be joining us. Uh, without much ado, let me start the whole proceeding. We've had this talk between you know, Xi Jinping and our Prime Minister Modi a few days back. And after that, we've had some action on ground as reported by the press, all that. But what we have to do is understand is this comes 7 years after Doklam, 4 years after Galwan, and 2 years after the Yangtze, where actually people had, hand to hand, I wouldn't say combat, but contact, definitely, right? And in all these 7 years, India-China relations were strained. And there was a perception that we had lost ground to Chinese in these areas. Uh, as it appears that as if we've going to get back the whole lot, which means, give or take a few points here and there, uh, Xi Jinping is going back to square one, virtually on ground from where he started, 7 years back. So what the whole story all about? But then, in in this vitiated atmosphere between India and China, any small breakthrough is also big. There's no doubt, right? Uh, the breakthrough has happened. The details are hazy. There is action on grounds, but everyone is reporting it, but we don't know actually what it is because it's not put out in public sphere. Maybe for good reasons. Okay. Uh, the meet between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping would, give a lot of jubilation to Russia, and it would have given a lot of heartburn and problems to USA, who would be thinking out of the, whole story, right? And then there's the whole angle of the China-India relations. Where will it go from here? I've been reading a few Chinese, news portals. One thing common which comes across both sides is there's a lot of mistrust on both sides, and the expectations are pretty low. Of course, from the Chinese side, one expectation which overrides everything is how fast will commerce between India and China normalize, right? And then, of course, there are issues of this whole story which is developing, or this whole relationship which is developing, which will impact our general foreign policy outlooks. It will, in some way or the other. It has effect on BRICS, Quad, Indo-Pacific, and then the competition in Asia and all that. There are diplomatic, political, and military angles to the whole affair. Right. Now, with this as a backdrop, we have a variety of experts with us. So what I would request all of you to do is speak from your expertise and what you feel about it, so that we get a variety of ideas from all three. And as the professor joins, we'll get his ideas also, and then we'll see where it goes. I'll first request General Gautam Murthy, sir, uh, uh, kindly take over, sir. All yours.
Thank you, General Shankar. Good evening to you and my fellow panelists, and good evening to your viewers. At the outset, you have to forgive me for sounding like a croaking frog because I've got a sore throat. But let me start off by first uh, felicitating General Vinod Bhatia and his brothers in arms, our infantry. Today is the Infantry Day. General Bhatia not only was our DJMO, but he was also DJ Infantry. And if China has come to the table to discuss everything, it is thanks to the infantry that is spearheading the thrust of the Indian Army, whether it is along the line of control, Arunachal Pradesh, line, line of actual control, wherever it may be. And felicitations to you, sir, and your brothers in arms. On this particular day, we discuss as to why China, what has happened, how did this breakthrough get about? It has very significant implications for both nations and in a broader geopolitical landscape. Now, this will mark a very pivotal moment in our bilateral relations, and it has very potential long term effects. The basic issue that was bedeviling our relationship was, as we all know, that China just came for an exercise during COVID and then went ahead and occupied places where they did not permit us to patrol any further. Now we have reached a consensus to resume patrolling in the critical areas, and General Bhatia will speak about it, about them, the Depsang Plains, Demchok, which have been long-standing points of contention. Now, both sides have indicated that this development is a step forward to restoring the status quo ante. Prior to April 2020, our External Affairs Minister has reiterated it even very recently at the NDTV symposium that they had. The Indian Army and every GOC from that time onwards was very clear, and the army commanders and the chiefs, that we want a return to pre-2020 conditions. So, what is the first implication? First implication is that there is the danger of a military confrontation has been put aside. The LSA has seen several heightened tensions, also the McMahon line towards Arunachal, but now this will hopefully lead to a more stable border situation, which will allow for regular patrolling. Now they're looking at different models. General Bhatia will speak about it. The other thing which Ambassador Trigunayat will also speak about is that the diplomatic effort that has gone behind this, it has been huge. This agreement will pave the way for further discussions, and viewers must understand one aspect of it, that diplomacy is not simply issuing statements. There's a lot of background work to be done, as we say, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And this agreement will pave the way for further discussions at various other summits that will be coming up. Political dialogue will increase apart from what the diplomats are doing. Political dialogue at the level of the Prime Minister, at the level of various ministers, for trade, for commerce, and even going into other areas, primarily the economy. This will increase. We have seen that political engagement between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Mr. President Xi Jinping, which was very frequent prior to Galwan and now after the recent meeting when they met after almost 6, 7 years, there is a hope that these meetings will continue further. The other resumption of talks, again, Ambassador Trigunayat will speak about, is about the special representatives from both countries, which aim basically to develop a long-term strategy for managing not only the border, but enhancing our strategic communication. Therefore, and with China, Ambassador will bear me out, you have to have a structured approach. And point by point, because every word is given its weightage. Military strategy, both countries will assess and reassess their deployments. India had increased the troop deployment, and we had indicated a serious strategic shift to make it more robust. Will this continue? General Bhatia will throw some light on it. Economic implications, trade relations, they're bound to see a thaw. There are many commentaries which are saying that this came about as a push because India would also stand to lose in case the ties take a further hit, but we will benefit mutually from trade, with China becoming India's largest trading partner. Improved relationship will lead to increased business engagements, direct flights, resumption of visa services, so on and so forth. Investment opportunities, we know that there are certain strictures that have been passed and certain um, embargoes the government has put on doing business with China, especially Chinese investment. But perhaps this could increase this going forward. About strategic realignment, General Shankar had mentioned, of course, this that now basically between India and China, improved relations will alter our dynamics, particularly with the United States, as it will not view this India as a counterbalancing force as it viewed it earlier. A thaw in our relationships will certainly complicate our strategy going with the United States. And India is growing assertive on the global stage. Everybody is seeing it. So we are likely to see a shift here. And in far as there will be a more balanced approach, according to most commentators, about our relationship with the US as with China. As far as regional stability is concerned, this will contribute positively to regional peace and security. And this is essential in the broader geopolitical context. However, there are challenges ahead. Firstly, is the trust deficit. Despite the positive development, there's been a significant trust deficit that remains between India and China. Indians have been bitten, and as they say, once bitten, twice shy. We have to be careful, trust, verify, but we have to continue to verify because any negative move can set this process back to where it was initially. And military issues, it does not resolve the broader territorial claims, but at least the old agreement of peace and tranquility. Maybe we revert back to that more by my panelists as we go along. And finally, I would like to say that it is a crucial step in reduction of tensions, and it is good for both diplomatic relations, regional stability, good for the soldiers who are deployed on the border. We have to look at it from their point of view also, that they're not in confrontation at those icy heights. So, all in all, I'll say that this will continuation of this will depend on sustained diplomatic efforts, economic cooperation, and the ability to manage our unresolved disputes very effectively with regular border meetings, so on and so forth. This is all that I have to say. Back to you, General Shankar. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot for your intervention. I'd like to second your thoughts on our infantry before I talk of anything else. We have the best infantry in the world, and all of us are proud of it because at every point of time, they've kept the flag of the nation up and about. Okay. And you made a couple of significant points. This is a pivotal moment in not only China-India relations, I think even in global relations. Because there's a slight shift which has happened with this just meeting. It gives a new opportunity to everyone. It also shows a new set of challenges to everyone. So there is a realignment which takes place. Even for India, it creates a lot of leverages. As much as it creates a lot of leverages, there are a lot of pitfalls also which are ahead, which we need to be cognizant of, right? And of course, the a point which I'd like to highlight, and I'm sure it'll keep coming back again and again, is that there's no way of that we'll go back to pre-20 days as in the LAC. The LAC could go back to pre-2020 days, but the relationship will not go back because this is a new relationship in this intervening 7 years. I'm talking of 7 years from Doklam to now. And maybe General Bhatia will say, no, this is not 7 years. This was coming for the past one decade. Uh, right? Our relationship has changed because India has changed in these 10 years, and so has China, right? In my way of thinking, India has risen, and China has, gone past its peak, and it's now declining. And we can have a debate on that whether it's declining or not, but it's not definitely rising anymore, right? And of course, reduction of forces and all that. I think it's a little too premature to talk about it because, uh, you know, there are indications which I want to highlight of a bit of a rift between PLA and the political hierarchy at the in China. And the political situation in China, I'm sure Professor Kondapalli will bring it out, is not that stable. And it is history that PLA and when PLA and the political hierarchy are not on one page, things could happen. So that danger still exists. I'll not say more. I now request Ambassador Tribunayat, sir, your views and you flow the way you want to, you view it and where you see it going. All yours, sir.
Thank you, sir. In fact, I feel that Galwan was good for us. It was a wake up call, as we couldn't have been just wading through the kind of changes that were taking place. So, in a way, it is a good thing. So, let's begin from there. It has been 4 years and 7 years, as you mentioned, since Doklam and even before. But at the same time, as you know, the two large neighbors whose trajectory tends to define the global south as well as the global geopolitics. And when they are at odds, it is definitely a bit difficult thing. And there are many factors that have happened. But you know that I must compliment, in fact, our military and diplomacy, both, for these 55 odd meetings that took place. And it was consistent for last 4 years. So it was also a culmination of India's continued policy that we have been propagating everywhere, be it Russia-Ukraine war, be it the other wars in the Middle East and elsewhere, that dialogue and diplomacy can only bring about peace. So the fundamental dimension of that is India has proved by continuing to engage with China, although often we have said that business as usual cannot go on. But ironically, the business has grown, but the business in the political sense, the relationship has been at its lowest. Although Prime Minister Modi, I think this is his 21st meeting, if I'm not wrong, with President Xi Jinping. The last one really was at Johannesburg at the BRICS summit when China did eventually agree to support India's G20 presidency. So there have been indicators that have been coming. But as you mentioned, perhaps there is a problem between the PLA and, of course, the LAC is a fluid state. So there are going to be issues. So that's why during this meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, on the sidelines of this BRICS summit in Kazan, it was virtually a given that every effort will be made to have this meeting happen now. And Russians have been, as you know, been propagating RIC, in which I was there in 2000s, and at that time, Primakov had started this. And since then, we've been meeting. Then BRICS came about, and since then, we have been Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and all these organizations. We are there, but we are also there as sort of different poles within these groupings, representing different things while agreeing on certain regional dimensions. But bilaterally, there has always been a certain sense of competition, and that has gone on. Now, here, this is something, as you know, that till today we are talking about whether, and Prime Minister Modi was very clear, and he mentioned that I'm happy to see you and meet you, and that we need to work together on this. And they both, the special representatives, the NSA level, have been tasked to restart the talks on the border. Because see, the LAC is the dragon in the room. So whether we like it or not, we have to resolve it. The border issue has to be resolved. Right now, this will be the north and south, which will left Depsang and Demchok. They will be solved. There will be patrolling points agreed to by both sides. Everything may perhaps go back to pre-2020. This may come back. What happens to so much of infrastructure that has been created by the Chinese? So, but Chinese do understand that they are not looking at a military confrontation with India in the near future, because the Chinese game plan is essentially to dislodge United States from its numero uno position. That's it. So any war in between is going to stymie that effort. So that's there. On the other hand, we must also not forget, while these efforts for normalizing ties are going to be there, number one, the China is going to be our challenge in every geography, more so in South Asia and West Asia. These are the two places in Africa also that we need to be very careful. Secondly, in Asia, China still believes in a unipolar Asia. Whatever it may say at the BRICS SCO anywhere else, that there is enough space for two of us to be there, but that's what they want. And globally, they are looking for a bipolar world order. So we have to begin with that premise and always keep in our mind that this is something that will happen. Now, another thing is that why it actually happened. The peace and tranquility is always a desirable objective between among neighbors, and the issues must be resolved through dialogue, which we have been doing it. Both are ambitious countries, aspirational powers, wanting to go have a regional and global influence. So that's a given for both of us. A growing much faster pace, and India is much faster pace growing, but China is also. I mean, we might agree or disagree on the pace of the reforms, the problems that they are facing, but the structural issues between the two countries also exist and continue to exist. One more thing which is very important is, since the economic engagement with China has continued to grow in the past, despite several efforts that India tried to make, once again, we are witnessing that the Indian companies have begun to exert pressure that we need to be more focused on enhancing ties until such time that we have developed our own competencies and capabilities, whether it's Atmanirbhar or otherwise, whichever way. And thirdly, of course, the geopolitical dimension is increasing. Why China is keen to do that? That's also very important. You see, the Chinese are very smart, and those people who say that everybody is moving out of China, all these companies, China plus one model, this and that. If you go to Vietnam, you will see Chinese companies or Chinese government have invested a great deal in Vietnam. So their global value supply chains go on from there. On the other hand, they see that India, which is trying to follow its strategic autonomy with a close partnership with the West, and if they invest here and things move out of here to the country, so they continue to retain their primacy in the global value supply chains. So this is also something that I think that we will have to factor in whichever way we would like to have a look. Now, I think the others will be able to throw more light on actual physical boundaries, what will happen, what will not happen. I personally believe that these confidence building measures are essential. We also need to buy peace. It's very important. Let's look at it this way. Be very realistic in this term rather than giving hoary objectives, because we have a lot to gain, because there is an asymmetry. This current asymmetry between China and India needs to be bridged somehow, and we'll have to work much faster, much power, and we also need a peace on our borders for that purpose. So I would say that just we must probably put in 4 P's, as I just thought of. One is power, very important to have a comprehensive power, economic and military power, to be able to to defend yourself in the first place and to exert your influence as the next. Then you need to have patience. Strategic patience with the Chinese, I think, is very much necessary. And PELF, you have to be a rich country with a checkbook diplomacy. And that is going to be the reality going forward in whichever geography in the developing world we are going to be, whether the voice of Global South. Without that checkbook diplomacy, it will find a problem. And then only last P, that is peace, to some extent can be achieved. I'll stop here, sir. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. I think you made some very, very important points. I'd like to highlight those which you have made. Important thing, Galwan was good for the nation. It shook the nation up. If Galwan had not happened, and this is what many times General Bhatia and I have discussed, we wouldn't have been in this kind of a bargaining position also. It revolutionized India. India has a history of, losing on table what we've won on ground. But this time we see this flip, which is a very good thing, which very few people have caught. But as you spoke, Ambassador, it came to me that for the first time, what we are doing on ground and what we have done on the table, diplomatically, economically, and politically, has been absolutely good, and we are coming to some conclusion. And I only hope we convert it back on ground. What everything else? I mean, because it's a thing which is still in motion. Uh, yeah, because everything has to be still settled on ground. Uh, you also spoke that China has a larger aim of, a unipolar Asia and a bipolar world. In this question, I think India has to decide what is its aim. What is India's aim? When China is very clear for the past 10 years, it's been, or more, it's been putting out this aim. But what is India's aim is something which we have to think of. We spoke of trade. Whereas trade has been increasing, the trade deficit has also increased. So that this one-sided trade, I'm afraid, is not the way to go forward. So we have to think out of the thing because I see a lot of greedy businessmen who are just in it for the whole to make a fast buck. But I think there is a requirement for a government to sit down and think it through so that any trade or investment from China has value to us and we don't become another Vietnam. Because you cannot say be another Vietnam, and of course the trade deficit has to reduce. You made an important point of buying peace, right? You have to buy your peace. For that, you have to give something. So that's something which is important. And of the last 4.4 P's, which you said, power, patience, wealth, and peace, I think is very significant. And I'm sure General Bhatia will talk of 4 Ds. 4 Ds and 4 Ps should come out in this discussion, the way I look at it. Uh, Thanks a lot, sir. With this, I'd request General Bhatia. I'll call Professor Kondapalli at the end because then it'll give him a chance to observe what he's missed out on. General Bhatia, sir, all yours.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be, an education also to be on the platform of Casa and Kanishot. And today's Infantry Day, thank you for the wishes. And I salute all the infantrymen. Indian infantry, Indian Army is by far the most combat-rich, battle-hardened army and infantry in the world. Salute to the soldiers, please. It's very interesting listening to Ambassador TRIGUNAYAT and, of course, the General GAUTHAM MOORTHY and General P.I. SHANKAR. Let me start by saying that you point the right word, breakthrough. A lot of people are talking about agreements. I don't think there's an agreement. There's a breakthrough, basically. And this breakthrough is a win-win situation both for India and China. Somehow we are touting as a victory for India. I think China needs it as much as India needs it, if not more. It is not that China does not need peace and tranquility along the line of actual control for the present. I'm not talking all this. I'm talking for the present. Because come 2020 and what China did was a strategic intent. It demonstrated strategic intent. And it has always been doing that. The Chinese strategy way to understand has always been first claim, which it claims was 1959, thereafter occupy, thereafter legitimize, and then integrate. So that's what China has been doing. That's the Chinese strategy. If you see everywhere, China has done that. And whether it's Tibet, Taiwan, not Taiwan, Turkmenistan, or Outer Mongolia. And this is what exactly it wanted to do out here. But it it did not appreciate a strategic resolve by India to defend its territorial integrity. And that is where I think we should see where all elements of national power, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, have been synergized and the political have been synergized. And we have stood that, the last man standing has given us the uh, power to deal with China from a position of relative strength. The asymmetry exists, but there's a position of relative strength. And that is why through political dialogue, through diplomatic dialogue, WMCC, through the military dialogue, 4 level talks, through commerce and trade, we've been able to pressurize China to vacate areas which it had occupied, which it has not done anywhere else other than 1979. And China, of course, believes in taking lessons and doing a lot of other things. Having said that, let me also say that it is not the end, it is only the beginning. to say that China has gone back and it will not happen again, I don't subscribe to that. We should not even talk about trust deficit, because we should only trust ourselves. We should not trust anyone else. We face it a bit too often, and we should not trust anyone. We trust our own self and trust our own capabilities. And here I fully endorse what Ambassador Triggunayath said. One, I thank China, and we've spoken about it earlier, for Galwan. And two, we got to purchase peace through preparedness. We got to be willing to spend monies. We have to reduce asymmetries. We cannot asymmetries will exist, but then we'll have to do certain things to ensure that the asymmetric differential, or the military differential, the economic differential is reduced, the asymmetry is reduced, so that we can face up to China. And the threat has not gone anywhere. Threat has always been there. It continued to be there. And China, as it challenges the US, it needed India on its side. If not India on its side, needed neutral India, and that's what it's exactly done. So, and we should not give too much of a credit that India has done something. China was looking for a face-saving exit, which it has got. So it has got a face-saving exit, and rightly so. It has gone back, and it's okay with us. We are fine with it. Absolutely. Territorial integrity, strategic autonomy is a core national interest, and that is where we are. Now, if you look a little further, if you know China, it had opened too many fronts. It is the Taiwan front, South China Sea, the East Sea, because Japan too is materializing, Korea, and India-China border. The 5 flashpoints, major flashpoints of conflict in the world, had a China connect, right? So we should also understand what China is looking at. Understanding China, I think Professor Kondapalli will be more this thing. We need to understand China, and we should look at China from the Indian perspective rather than always reading the Western perspective of China and understanding China on that way. So understanding China, I think, is exceedingly important, and that is what we will do. Now, a little way forward. The way forward, like you rightly said, I will repeat myself, the 4 Ds, in addition to the 4 Ps. The 4 Ds being defend line of action control, because that is the start point. Dominate the sea lines of communication, because that is the vulnerability, China's strategic vulnerability, strategic concerns. And depth diplomacy to bind to balance with nations where we have convergence and forms of interest, Quad and other multipolar forums, multilateral forums. And 4th D, of course, is the deny China space in the neighborhood, which really is something of a challenge right now, because China has got the a fat checkbook, and it believes in not only world diplomacy, but it also believes in debt traps, and also that's what it's doing. And India soft power will definitely, I think, in the long run, win over China's sharp power. So that is where we should be looking at. Now, coming down to when we purchase peace through preparedness, let me take a few minutes on that. Militarily, it's very important, and I'll cover the military part of it. What has actually happened is that China in Depsang, as I see it, and I may be wrong, and it is happening for a decade now. It started on 14th April 2013, when the first came, 19.5 kilometers occupied the bottleneck at Lakhi Nala, which they've done again. And that denies a easy access. I don't say it denies access. It denies us a logical, easy, optimal access to the Depsang plains, and to especially patrol point 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Because coming from north is difficult, coming from Jivan is difficult, so that is what it is. So now that they are moving back from here, I think the way forward is that the two sides, that is the PLA and the Indian Army, will lay down the periodicity, the frequency, and the strength of patrols. And it will be so laid down that as they start dismantling, the satellite is very clear that they start dismantling certain quasi-permanent structures they created. But the challenge also remains, because they have a track coming from Chipchap right up to Bottleneck and Burtse, which is much nearer, but we don't have a road access to Bottleneck and beyond. So that is something which we'll have to do. So what we need to continue to do is, and thanking China again, once again, continue to build infrastructure. Because something we've been lagging behind is infrastructure. China, on the other hand, has a multimodal infrastructure, state-of-the-art infrastructure, and it's got a logistics infrastructure of sustaining 3.6 lakh tons of logistics within the border areas of Tibet. Right? In our case, we need to build infrastructure, and we got to build logistics, because logistics gives us flexibility. We have certain terrain advantages we should optimize. China has to bring everything from the from the mainland to some kilometers away. We are much nearer, but then we also have terrain fractured sectors. So what we need to do is keep reserves, keep contingencies, and we need QRF. We have strategic mobility, but we have to enhance our operational mobility, our tactical mobility, and our battlefield mobility. Because mobility is very important, especially in the mountains. Whether it is your invest in capability development, capability building, capacity enhancement, because China respects strength, and we should deal with China from a position of relative strength. So we will look at that. But there's one structural fault I think we should look at, and let me say it out. We should also understand our weaknesses. There's structural systematic fault in our manning the land actually, and that is we got two forces: the army and the ITBP. And ITBP comes to the Ministry of Home Affairs, and we sometimes do pass conflicting instructions either through the ministries or through intermediate headquarters. As for the group of ministers report post Kargil Review Committee, para 5.2 was categorical. It said that all border guarding forces, single border guarding force, and the contested or the non-settled borders, unsettled borders should be manned by the army, that is the LC and the LAC. However, ITBP is not under operational control of the army, and I think this correction we should do. Well, it's okay to come up and say everything is very fine. No, things have to improve. We have to look forward, and if we do not look forward, again we'll find mounting. The next thing I think we really need to synergize, and we should understand that I'm giving out the weaknesses, is the ISR, the intelligence, surveillance, and defenses. We have to synthesize the strategic intelligence, the operational intelligence, and tactical intelligence. We were taken by surprise in 2020, which should never happen again. We cannot be taken by surprise. So what we need to do is continue to enhance our ISR capabilities, infrastructure, ensure that we man the LAC as we will manning, and as per the new whatever agreements come to, protocols are there. Trust your own capabilities and ensure reserves with adequate mobility to shift them and have your contingencies ready. So this is something which I will stop. But we should also, one more last caution I will say, we should understand China's capabilities. And China's capability in the multi-domain warfare. They talk of the Great Wall, and fortunately they talk a lot and do little sometimes. They talk of the Great Wall of snow, of sand, of surface, of sea, of subsurface, of space, and cyber. Right? They talk of the Great Wall. And they also talk of the Great Wall of villages. They have constructed these villages and they're populating them. And we also have a vibrant village project, but we need to invest more in the vibrant village project. We still have something known as the inner line permit for visiting our border areas. I see no reason why we should have inner line permits, at least for Indian nationals. We should open it up and we should invest in the people of our border areas. And we should not only look at Eastern Ladakh. Our focus is totally diverted to Eastern Ladakh. In the media and other things, but we should also be aware that there can be a crisis in Dolam, in Sikkim, and basically in Tawang and Arunachal Pradesh, whether fishtails or with other areas. So we should be looking at our capabilities all along the 3, 4, 8 kilometers of India-China border. It is not only Eastern Ladakh, it is not only Depsuk, it's only Demchok, but it is all right from Karakoram to Kibutu. And that is what our focus should be, and not get taken by surprise in any other place, because that is not acceptable actually. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, sir. I thought you covered some really good points, which we've been discussing. You put them very succinctly. I'll speak of the asymmetry a little later. But what the main thing which you brought out of 4Ds, defend the LAC, dominate the maritime space because they are connected. Diplomacy, multilateral diplomacy with everyone in multilateral organization, and deny space in the neighborhood. I think these four plus the 4 Ps which the ambassador said will serve the nation quite a bit. The common point of purchasing peace through preparedness. You need to buy your peace, right? It's not only dealing with China, you need to prepare for it and this thing. And like you rightly said, I think China had opened too many fronts. And one of the reasons why he is given ceded ground here is to keep his strategic intent and keep his larger aim in mind. And that is this face-saving exit which he's created for himself to do this. Because now he's selling it to his people that look, we are getting out because we have the larger aim and we don't want to be, we want to keep our focus on the West and on USA and things like that. And we need India on our side. And this is what the sense I get when I read the Chinese media. Okay. Uh, I think it's very important that we know the ambassador spoke about the asymmetry, and you spoke about though there is asymmetry, we can speak to them from a position of strength on ground. And that I think is what has seen us through. Because I mean, you could have all kinds of strength, but on ground, you need to have the strength to overcome that, the best infantryman in the world, which China has not been able to do. And that's why it has, stuck where it is. And you have been to the Y Junction and Jivannala and all those places. It is not as if those were complete obstacles where we couldn't go ahead at all. I would like to explain this to everyone. You could circumvent all of them in a set of circumstances. They were not complete blockades. Only thing is, if you did that, it was escalation. And that is what India didn't want to do. It is not that as if India didn't have the capability of, outflanking them or outmaneuvering them. And then the issue is, how do you reduce this asymmetry? You reduce it through better preparedness by, better ISR, better logistics, better approach to multi-domain war, and to have increase your mobility. I think the very deep things. I'm virtually reiterating what you have said, and I think everyone has to understand. And the most important point made between the ambassador and General Bhatia is that asymmetry can be handled. And that is something which people have to understand. We've handled it. While there is asymmetry, you have to start living with it and handle it. Right. With this, I'd request Professor Kondapalli, sir, all yours. Please carry on.
Thank you very much, General Shankar. Good evening to the fellow panelists. Good evening to the audience as well. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to interact. Well, the sequence of events have all been mentioned by the previous speakers, and also what India needs to do in this regard. Since Foreign Secretary Mr. Vikram Misri made that statement on October 21st, followed by External Affairs Minister Dr. Jayashankar's statement on disengagement process and going back to March 2020 positions. And then on 23rd October, the Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping meeting in Kazan on the agreement related to the patrolling and others. They also mentioned about the SR talks to be resumed in the process. So the Chinese military, their websites, etc., they have not spoken much about it. In fact, they were citing Foreign Secretary Mr. Misri's statements, and also the BBC and others who carried all this information. Generally, the Weibo and WeChat discussions, they have been very negative coverage on India, expressing suspicion of the deal and also putting several questions on the current round of patrolling access being given to the Indian side in Depsang and Demchok. So this is quite stark in the Chinese social media. Official media has only cited the foreign ministry spokesperson's comments about resolving the relevant issues. They did not mention much about the border as such and the main arrangements that are being made for patrolling and other details in these two areas. They did cite the WMCC meeting in August this year. Also, the Corps Commander level meeting in February, that was also part of the discussion. And they cited, the Chinese cited Dr. Jaishankar's meeting with Mr. Wang Yi in Astana and Vientiane, and also National Security Advisor Mr. Ajit Doval's meeting with Wang Yi in Russia. So these were mentioned, but there was no fresh insight in terms of what exactly is going to happen in the Ladakh, Aksai Chin region in terms of the arrangements that are announced. Indian side actually has more information regarding this, and also the dates for patrolling resumption and others. So it appeared to be a kind of stunned silence on the part of the Chinese media, but we have been agog about the situation that is evolving on the border. So this disparity we can see in terms of the Chinese coverage, including the military blocks, and the Indian side, where you have all across the social media, the coverage is very intensive in India. So you see this asymmetry, not just asymmetry of power, but also asymmetry of narrative war, and the higher ground that the Indian side occupies in terms of the situation on the border and the preparations being made. It appears to be more Indian initiatives rather than China. Of course, that is not true, because both hands have to meet and a final, outcome is to be looked at. So from the point of view of coverage, we see a lot of Indians have covered this. Not so much very bland statements in the social networking sites in China. That is quite visible in this. So they did mention, of course, about the 4.5 years of armed stalemate on the border. The kind of escalation that has been made by the forces on the border at the petrol points, which are under the control of the Chinese in Depsang Plains and Demchok. But there is also no mention about the buffer zones and what does that mean for the local dynamics. So there is some did mention that this is a positive development. Some mentioned that this is also a kind of united front against the United States. There was a commentary in a PLA daily about some time ago, not immediately now, but mentioning about the India should distance from the US. And so there is also that angle, foreign policy angle, and United States specifically on the Quad. And there is a more specific comment by the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson on the US State Department announcement on Arunachal Pradesh as part of India. I think that was quite stark in recent times. But the US factor has been highlighted in many of the commentaries in the blogs. So that is a... there is also a mention quietly in some social networking sites that what China is doing is currently only tactical move, and the pressures of Taiwan, South China Sea, Senkaku Islands, and other fronts with the United States were one of the main reasons for China, in addition to, of course, the economic factors.
Looks like China.
The
Yeah, please go
issues
ahead.
related to, yeah, so the issues related to the problems that the PLA is facing in Western Theater Command. There was a mention about some 58 casualties on the Chinese side since Galwan began, not those in the June 15th night, but subsequently because of the lack of oxygen and other. So this has been one of the features of the kind of assessment that was made by the Chinese side, and also the issues in relation to the agreement as such. While there is no joint declaration, joint statement in this regard, and this appears to be part of the Chinese pressure not to conclude any major agreement, explicit agreement on this, documentation, so on and so forth, but leave it at the local level and see how situation evolves. But the pressure on economic downturn, the other fronts that China has, is quite visible in the Chinese, references to the Galwan-related, arrangements now, last 4 or 5 days. So this is one key feature. There is a mention about the economic aspect, trade, and so on and so forth in the social networking sites. There was a comment by Wang Dehua, who was one of the doyens of China-India relations. He is pretty senior in terms of the scholarship, etc. He said that if India has to rise, it has to take assistance from China in terms of investments, trade, and so on and so forth. So this is quite a stark comment that came about. When we actually look at the brass tacks, the total Chinese investments in India is no more than $8 billion cumulatively last 20-25 years. For an economy which is around $18 trillion, $8 billion is quite a surprise amount. Also, in terms of the Chinese participation in the infrastructure projects, which is quite minimal. Even before those restrictions were placed, the April 2020 press note 3, which had mentioned about the restrictions on investment. Even before that, the Chinese total investments have been very minimal. Even though President Xi Jinping, when he visited India in September 2014, he said they will invest about $100 billion with a manufacturing center in Pune and in Ahmedabad. But none of these materialized. As I mentioned before, only $8 billion has been the total investment. The other pressure that China is facing is the EV sector, electronic vehicle sector, which they want to kind of pressurize India to admit to the flow, because they are facing a lot of problems in the automobile sector. The conventional vehicles, petrol, diesel, etc., they most of these automobiles have been shut down because of the competition from the EV sector, and because of the European Union US tariffs, which are nearly about 100%, and we had about 18% tariffs so far on the Chinese EV sector. So comparatively better position in relation to India. And there is a serious discussion in China on the EV exports to India. So this is seen as the one of the major compromises that China may have made in post-Galwan related events. It is too early to say about the 30 engagement dialogues we have with China. There is a foreign secretary level strategic dialogue. 8 or 9 of these were conducted. There is an annual defense dialogue since Mr. Pranab Mukherjee initiated in 2006. as the defense minister at that time. There is also the Niti Aayog NDRC macroeconomic dialogue that has also been stalled. There was youth dialogue. There is think tank to think tank media dialogue, museums exchange of information, etc. So totally about 30 dialogue processes exist between China and India. All of these have been shut down due to Galwan. So there was some debate in terms of when these will be resumed. And also, as other speakers have mentioned, General Moorthy mentioned about the direct flights and visa restrictions. In fact, last 3-4 months, there has been a certain campaign from the Chinese side on the visas and also on the direct flights and so on. So this may be too early at this moment because of we need to see what the progress is in terms of resuming patrols and other details on peace and tranquility on the border. So it's too early to say because the Chinese have hardly given away their views regarding the last 4 or 5 days of dynamics that have been unfolding. So we should hold our houses back. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. I think you also made some very interesting points, a different set of points, if I may say. An important thing which you said is relatively there's more chatter on our side and less on theirs. And for some reason, there's been no internal talk within China about what this deal is all about. And that has probably given some space for unnecessary chatter going about. But their think tanks are coming out in different directions. But if you see their talks of BRICS, indirectly they have said, look, it's good to do this deal with India because then it gives us leverage in BRICS. And BRICS, my sense is that they're betting big on BRICS to take them to that position all over the world. Okay. Now, you also spoke of asymmetry of narrative, which is going on in this kind of a case. I think that's a very important issue. As far as the casualties are concerned, I think it's a very important issue that we understand that what the professor said, that the Chinese have been suffering a lot of casualties in Eastern Ladakh. And that has its own effect on morale and the effect back home, right? And we don't know about it because the figures are vary. The professor says 58 since Galwan, but there are also figures which say 55 in the past 12 months. The truth might be somewhere in between, but the fact is that they've had casualties, and that tells on polity quite a bit. Okay. As far as investments are concerned, I'd like to clarify. There was a report in South China Morning Post where they had quoted their relevant ministry, which had given instructions to people not to invest in Turkey and India. I've read this post. Okay, so there is the official edict within within China. Of course, this came about 2 weeks back of not investing in Turkey and India at this point of time. So I don't know whether investment will start immediately. Like what the professor said, the issue is at this point of time, how do you resume dialogue? How do you resume direct flights? How do you resume those visa restrictions and things like that? Only when you get these small things that you can think of a bigger thing called investment, right? Like all have said, there's a lot of fluidity still left. We have to understand, we're just about 6 days since the meeting has taken place and some kind of arrangement has been brought about. It is still an arrangement. It's not a settlement. It's not a pact. We still have to talk of the border, and this is just restoring status quo ante 2020. Okay, it's just one small step. It's a big step. We need to discuss. Unless we discuss, we will also not get clarity as to how to go ahead. I'll not have a second round, but I'll take a few questions, and through that, we will address the second round and views from each. Okay. Each panelist, sorry. This question from Bhaskar Verma. He says, my question is to Ambassador Trigunayat as to what is wolf warrior diplomacy of China, why nowadays it's not doing, and how should we do diplomacy in a multi-polar world? But the way I look at it is, let me turn the question around and I'll ask, how should our diplomatic approach be to China vis-a-vis one-to-one in multilateral forums and in our neighborhood? And then if you could, also satisfy Bhaskar with his views, I'll be grateful. All yours, sir.
Thank you, sir, for that question. In fact, very fascinating discussion, which is going on different dimensions. But China had tried to master two things. One is the gray zone warfare, in which I think no one can match it as of now. And it uses that to overpower various dimensions across a country of its target. And it is a lot written about it, a lot of research has been done, but they continue to do so. And that has provided it, apart from its economic heft, that they can force certain narratives onto the people or the countries. And that's where the wolf warrior diplomacy, normally it should have been a wolf warrior, terrorists are called wolf warriors, but this is a wolf warrior diplomacy in which the Chinese diplomats go and try to project their power, their view. They said this is what you have to accept. And very, very conceited, arrogant, and aggressive behavior. This they started off few years ago. And that it was seen, and Professor will bear me out, that eventually they realized, and it was, I think, in one of the CPC meetings, it was debated upon that this was the strategy that was not paying them off. In fact, they were making more enemies, and it was being called out by more and more countries. So today you don't see the Chinese diplomats trying to use the same kind of an approach. The Chinese ambassador to India is a fair example of that. And you can have a look at it, what he has started doing. The new guy who has come has been very, very active, going around everywhere, trying to cultivate a large number of a big constituency and giving speeches. And I was reading his discussion with the Joint Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, talking all with positives. So that is something that one has to see, that now they have realized that wolf warrior diplomacy is not what is going to take them forward. As far as our diplomacy is concerned, I think that what we have done so far is the right thing. We also have to learn from the Chinese. In our neighborhood, while we may say that our policy is neighborhood first policy, non-reciprocal policy, but in the past and on certain occasions, some of our behavior also has been arrogant. And that has not served us well. We have also, in our public diplomacy, not been diversified enough, in my view. Our communication strategy also needs honing up. The only person who speaks clearly and everywhere is our foreign minister and the prime ministers. But then you need a very focused approach with proper machinery to follow it up in a unified manner. I have often said that even in Indian media, there's such kind of a diverse commentary taking place from our own people, from the diplomacy and from the military and from the academia. Is it not possible for the Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Defense to get together once a month and brief these guys who are also patriots? Exactly what is the line of the government, rather than listening and reading it from the newspaper. So I think that we have a long way to develop that policy. We are good, our soft power, our Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam philosophy, but how to carry it forward? It is one thing we have done in vaccine Maitri. We are the HADR #1. We are becoming the net security provider. So we have a lot of things to talk about, but to talk about in a way that is credible and that is acceptable by the other person. You see, that's what the essence of diplomacy is, that even if you tell somebody to go to hell, he goes happily. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot, sir. I think very valuable points. Next question to General Bhatia, sir. You said we should deal with China from a position of strength. China understands strength only. Question: does China listen to a military to military talk and take MEA lightly?
No, I think it's a I also said it's a whole of a time approach. We are synergized. We are one. We talk a whole of nation approach, but I find the diplomacy and the military go hand in hand. It's not that we are two different organs and should speak different languages. Even the WMCC also, which is headed by the Joint Secretary, there is a military rep in that. And similarly, when the core commander level talks take place in the talks are taking place on the borders, there is a rep of the MEA Joint Secretary there. So we are a synergized approach. So it is not that China will listen to military talks and not talk to the MEA lightly, but the fact remains that these are, though they're not parallel tracks, these are convergent tracks. And with China, the military talks have succeeded, the diplomatic talks have succeeded. We kept the channels open, not only diplomatic, military, also politically. So it is a whole of a approach, and we should not try to differentiate between the two. We talk one language, and so does China also talk one language. Let's also give them the credit. Don't underestimate China, please. That is the worst thing we'll ever do is underestimate China or any adversary for that matter. So China also has convergence between the military and the political commissars and the diplomacy, and so do we. So it is best that is we continue on parallel tracks, but we are one when it comes to our policy, when it comes to understanding, when it comes to a way ahead.
Thank you, sir. I think you made a very important point, and this is one great example, right? Like I said earlier, what we won on ground, we won on the table also, and what we won on the table, we're now translating it to the ground. Probably this is the first time in our own history where we've been able to really do that after the Bangladesh war. In the Bangladesh war, we did everything, right? But after that, this is probably the first time we're doing it in this manner. I leave it at that at this point of time. Sir, General Gautam Murthy, sir, what are the chances of India-China de-escalation would lead to demobilization in the border, and also India government thinking of bringing Chinese investment to India? Isn't this a bad idea?
Oh, this is a very interesting question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Okay, this is an interesting question whether de-escalation would lead to demobilization. I think the former DGMO is well placed to answer that. But in my own understanding of the situation, we are right now taking baby steps, and each step we are taking it and verifying it. They also taking, if we are taking 2 tens down, they also taking 2 tens down. So we are just moving away from an eyeball to eyeball confrontation. Maybe we'll move back. Whether our forces will de-induct from the Ladakh sector, whether mechanized forces will de-induct from there, I don't think so. It's going to happen in a hurry. In fact, General Shankar and I, for the rest of you, we both discussed this issue a couple of days ago. And finally, we came to the understanding that after having moved so many such forces over there, built up capacities there, we are not going to de-induct in a hurry from the Ladakh sector per se. We may move away, and Ladakh is huge. For those of you who have had the good fortune of being there, of seeing it, it is really, really huge. It's as big as any 4 or 5 of our own districts together in any of our states. About Chinese investment to India, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there are certain strictures, there are certain guidelines laid down. As of now, those guidelines will continue. I have not come across any material so far which says that we are easing up on those guidelines. Investments will be there, but there are through certain channels. And it is not going to be easy that they're going to come and take over your economy or anything of the sort. We have to be careful. We are going in an Atmanirbhar mode. We will be giving more opportunities. But yes, at a future stage, joint ventures or anything like that can very well happen in non-strategic sectors as I see it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Uh, Professor Kondapalli, this is an interesting question. He says, can opening people-to-people interaction through social media platforms be a good strategy for assessment of potential of Sino-Indian relationship?
Well, thank you very much for that question. No one is stopping us from the webinars and other using social networking sites between Chinese and Indians. In fact, COVID has taught us how to explore these possibilities. But I get the message that the people-to-people contacts have to be expanded. Yeah, it is between the civil societies interaction that should be enhanced. Of course, it is linked to whatever happens on the border because, as General Moorthy mentioned, once bitten, twice shy. So there is also that factor that needs to be looked at. Statistics-wise, there used to be about a lakh or two, 1 lakh to 2 lakhs of Chinese visitors to India, and more than 3 or 4 million Indians who are going to China for a long period of time. But Galwan has stopped this. Also, COVID, of course, pandemic had stopped this. Currently, there are about, prior to the pandemic, there were 30,000 students in China studying. That has now been reduced drastically because during COVID, they did not give the visas to the Indian students, even though these are all self-financed students. And also no remedy was made for them other than the webinar mode of education that they followed. But the visas are now being given since December 2023, December 2022, when the pandemic has been, the lockdowns have been lifted in China. So we should expect better days in terms of the tourism. But one of the things is that China uses tourism as a weapon. If you look at the cases of South Korean deployment of THAAD system, or Taiwan or other countries where they have stalled the tourists. So we should not have too much expectations in the tourism sector, people-to-people contacts, because that would not be a major thrust that China is thinking about. But also, I wanted to intervene on the wolf warrior diplomacy. The previous question. There is a movie called Wolf Warrior, and there is a series 1, 2, 3 of these sequels. And the first Wolf Warrior movie ends with a slogan that anywhere if a Chinese is beaten up or in trouble, then the state and others should come to the rescue of the Chinese. So since then, there was a campaign, both at the civil society level as well as at the diplomacy level, and the public diplomacy section has taken it on their stride. Many spokespersons have used the wolf warrior diplomacy language in protecting what they perceived as China's interests. They went overboard in terms of the Chinese, statements regarding various. For example, the Chinese ambassador to France criticized the French parliamentarians for going to Taiwan on a visit for whatever in Taiwan. Also, they criticized a researcher. The Chinese embassy in France criticized a French researcher by suggesting that his scholarship is not really up to the mark in relation to China. Then UK, Chinese ambassador to UK, Chen Xiaoming, also was very critical of the British parliamentarians for their views on China. And one of the most stinging criticism was for the Australian Prime Minister and Australia's component in ISAF, International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan, where the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson modified the photographs of some of these and put it up on his Twitter handle, Chao Liqian. Of course, he removed this later on, but this was one of the going very below the belt criticisms on Australia in terms of what they did in Afghanistan and so on. So that was quite an interesting comment from the Foreign Ministry spokesperson. Now they are relatively down recently, Wolf Warrior, because the Chinese Communist Party made a mid-course correction, and President Xi himself called for the reduction in such Wolf Warrior statements by suggesting that a positive image has to be created, etc. So the cue was taken from the highest leadership, and today we don't find those comments that used to be part of the previous Wolf Warrior diplomacy. On India, the Wolf Warrior diplomacy also existed in terms of the Galwan and post-Galwan events. If you look at the statements from the Chinese Foreign Ministry or from the embassy in New Delhi, such comments were quite extensive, or their interaction with the other civilian groups in India. I wanted to say about this.
Yeah, fine. Thanks a lot, sir. Ambassador Triguna, you did mention about investments from Hong Kong and through other those things. So we have to screen FDI from Vietnam, Malaysia, and other many PRC fronts which are there, shop fronts which are there. This is his comment, but it aligns with your thinking. I think you need to elucidate this, because as we go in for investments, we shouldn't become another Vietnam or another Malaysia, or for that matter, another Hong Kong. Your views on it, sir?
Well, sir, what Professor had mentioned about $8 billion, some of the figures I read was that most of our startups had very large support from the Chinese funds and others which were there. So I was wondering if are we looking at China only, something that is coming directly from China, or it is, as you mentioned, different companies they have set up in different parts of the world. They are also coming in here. We tried to screen them as well. And as you know, that these various instructions were issued to the agencies. But in recent times, I think that we have also modified those instructions and have started taking a more, I would say, benevolent view of these investments coming because of certain, I would say, industrialists, businesses which are feeling the pinch of the restrictions. For example, they are not able to get the technical personnel, and they are also visas not issued and all that. So now I think we are also moving forward in that direction. So whatever happened in Kazan was essentially a modicum of all these factors and interests that played out. China, of course, needs India in a way. The Indian market is pretty big, pretty consistent, increasing, and giving them bigger opportunities. So I think that they also look at India in a strategic manner, even though the trade is not that great compared to some of their other partners. But they are facing headwinds in different areas. So I think India makes a good sense, but we have to be extremely cautious in what we want, actually. Today, if you say that we are living in a globalized world, the multinational corporations will go everywhere. They have technology, they have funding, they have everything. And what do you think? What they do? They create narratives. So that is another challenge that one is going to have. China also have very large number of billionaires in the big companies that are operating in different parts, despite the problems that they have begun to face due to this Chinese bull warrior diplomacy, so to say. So, from our side, I think we need to have our own guardrails, which should be constantly, we have to be vigilant all the time in every which way, not only in trade and investments, but any other area. We can't be complicit or complacent about this.
Yeah, I think so. That's a major challenge we have. So how to build the guardrails, because we've never been good at it, right? Only unless we've been put under pressure, we have never been good at it. I'll take the last question, sir. General Bhatia, sir. How do we increase our recruitable population fit for high altitude warfare? And of course, the next question is about technology that we need to dominate to get an advantage on ground. But that will sort it out. But the first one, sir.
See, Mr. Srinivas Gopal, we already have a Sons of the Soil, what we call the Scouts actually. And we have Ladakh Scouts. We need to do more of that, but we have Ladakh Scouts for Ladakh. Then we have the Gadwal Scouts and the Kumaon Scouts for Uttarakhand and Himachal, Dogra Scouts. And then we have the Sikkim Scouts in Sikkim and Arunachal Scouts in Arunachal Pradesh. So we have a recruitable population there. And I'm not too sure what's going to happen after Agniveer. Honestly, let me be very clear about it, how it's going to play out. But our people are our strength, actually. It is not only the recruited population we're talking about, but whenever we operate in this or in the border areas, the first responders are our people, actually. And they have always helped us to survive and sustain in the hybrid area. They give us, their ponies, they give us the support system, they give us the logistics, and they carry our loads. And they're always so forthcoming. Hats off to them. My heart goes out to them because they are the ones who actually give us the moral booster. So that's why I said keep investing our people of the border areas, and that is why we should recruit more and more from the border areas, because for them acclimatizing is not a problem. They know the area well, and they will do us a lot of good. I agree totally on that.
Yeah, as far as technology is concerned, I mean, I would like to put it to everyone. It's not as if we lack technology. Look, we've got enough technology as far as space is concerned. We've got enough technology in strategic sectors. It's all homegrown technology. You don't have to run around to anyone for nuclear technology or missile technology and all that. I mean, many times we underestimate this business of technology. What we need is certain niche technologies for which we have to put structures together. And those technologies we don't need from China. That's the last place you have to get those technologies from, right? You need technologies which are homegrown or at best from trusted sources, not from China. Any app which you get from China also, it'll undermine your sovereignty. So it's not only investments, it's also allowing social media, all this nonsense which is coming in. We have to be very careful about it. And all I'll say is, look, uh, we have just started a renegotiation. We're just taking the baby steps of re-establishing our relationship. There's a change China and there's a changed India for the past 7 to 10 years. And the road ahead is not going to be easy. And we need to have clarity of thought when we go ahead. Okay, with this, I'll close the whole thing. General Gautam Murthy, sir, your final word, and you might like to say thank you to everyone.
Thank you, General Shankar, for this wonderful webinar, and pardon my throat again. Thank you, fellow panelists. And I think we had a very, very interesting discussion. Thank you, viewers, for your patience. And I won't take much of your time because I don't want to further sum up after what General Shankar has said and after all the speakers have said. And I wish everyone and your families a very, very happy Deepavali going ahead next week. Thank you.
Happy
Goodbye.
Diwali to
And
everyone.
Jai
Happy
Hind.
Deepavali to everyone. And
Jai Hind.
before I close, for the past 2 days, 24th and 25th, we've had the Chanakya Defense Dialogues, where some of the best minds in our country have spoken. I am releasing those tapes, those videos, every day in the morning. So I would suggest to all of you, please see them, because you see, all of us who are here, right, except the professor, we are all retired people. We are past. We are not hands-on into what we are doing. At best, some of us are in advisory capacity to the government of India. But whereas those people who have spoken on those, in those seminars and symposiums, are people who are hands-on, who are part of the government, who are part of respective governments who have come from abroad. So I would suggest all of you listen to them and pay attention, because you'll get the real thing, what the horse is speaking. Okay, with this, I'll all like to say all to everyone on the panel and all to the audience, very happy Deepavali to you, and wishing all of you a very happy Infantry Day once again. Thank you, good evening, and Jai Hind.
Same to you.
Yeah.
Jai Hind.
Jai
Thank you
Hind.
very much. Happy Deepavali.
Thank you, sir.